Now, when we move to the 80s, this computer may also not look very familiar to you. This is actually the first computer I ever used when I went to teach at Lewis and Clark College in the mid-1980s. And it did have increased speed, and the communicative approach in language teaching and learning was coming on the scene, and there was some ability to use this computer for that purpose. Higgins and Johns in a seminal article proposed some different approaches other than just drill and practice that started people thinking in a new direction. And yet still, when you look at this computer, you have to remember that this computer had such little memory that when I wanted to run the computer, I'd put a disk here that had the operating system, and that would start the computer. It had no hard drive. And when I wanted to save any data, I would have to take one disk out, put another disk in, and save my data. Still a far cry from what we know of computers today. But as we move to the 1990s and up until today, we have computers that look more like what we're used to seeing. And I have an Apple product here because I just happen to be an Apple user. But as we know, in the 1990s and up through today, we have multimedia computers, CD and DVD technology, which gives us access to audio and video. And then in the early 90s, the World Wide Web came along, which changed the face of call forever. It allowed for dissemination and creation of multimedia content with a high level of interactivity as well. Many call professionals have written about the development that call has gone through over the years, and the best known of these is Warschauer's phases of call. And to a great extent, they mirror the development of computers and also the progression in theories of second language teaching and learning. As you can see, in the 70s and 80s, we had the behavioristic model. Computer was basically a tutor that was delivering instructional materials. And into the 80s and 90s, with the advent of the personal computer, the computer began to be used more as a tool, or we could call it a workhorse. It gave skills practice. It wasn't always in drill format. Oftentimes it was used to stimulate discussion, writing, critical thinking, simulation programs such as SimCity. I remember using that in the late 80s to stimulate language learning. And then word processing programs, presentation programs like this PowerPoint I'm using now, concordancing. These were all used in the 80s and the 90s. And the final phase of call, discussed by Warschauer, is what he labels the integrative phase in the 21st century. And that's marked by an introduction of multimedia and internet. And maybe the most important development is hypermedia, which basically what allows teachers and students to study reading, writing, speaking, and listening in a combined way, because you can click on hyperlinks and go from one set of media to the other. That gives the learner much more control over the content and the pace of his or her learning. And internet also enables what Warschauer calls CMC, or computer-mediated communication, which basically means that in a synchronous way, which means at the same time, or an asynchronous way, which means at a convenient time, not at the same time, people can communicate with one another, students to teachers, students to students, and they can do that from anywhere. That's completely changed the face of language teaching. Now, some call experts, most notably Bax in 2003, have criticized Warschauer's view of what he calls integrative call, saying that call is not truly integrated yet because people still have a fear of computers and are still anxious around computers. And Bax argues that computers won't be truly integrated until they are normalized. He uses the term normalized, and by that he means when computers become basically invisible, we don't think about using them. And as examples, he gives a pen that we write with, or a watch for telling time, Those were inventions, but now we don't think about them. They become part of our daily lives. So when we view call today, we have to ask ourselves, have the traditional components of second language pedagogy changed in second language teaching and learning? Traditionally, we have the teacher, we have the learner, and we have English. Well, in their excellent text, Tips for Teaching with Call, Chappell and Jameson have used the following graphic, and as you can see, they've argued that the computer is more than a tool, and that it's not optional, but actually essential in effective second language learning and teaching, has become part of the pedagogy. And in that book, there are 3 assumptions listed for language learning. Learners need guidance in learning English. English is used for many different purposes, and teachers should provide that guidance by selecting appropriate language, structuring language activities. But I think there may be a caveat. I have said here that call may complement these strategies and lead to improved language learning. And why did I say may instead of saying call does complement these strategies? Well, stay tuned. We'll come to that in a moment. So this brings us to the end of section 1 of the talk, and a couple of questions to consider while we're loading up the next piece. Do computers themselves embody any philosophy of teaching and learning? And why is that an important question to ask? And is it possible to be an effective teacher in the 21st century without utilizing computers? Do you think so? Why or why not? Okay, we'll see you in a moment.